They were the golden couples of the silver screen, but behind the glamour, their love stories were filled with scandal, jealousy, and explosive secrets. In a world where appearances were everything, these 14-old Hollywood romances spiraled into chaos behind closed doors. Affairs turned into obsessions, marriages into battlegrounds, and passion into public spectacle. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on the most toxic and dramatic couples of Tinseltown's golden age, revealing the truth they tried so hard to keep hidden. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. When passion burns too hot.
Do you think of anything?
I told Richard something that I wanted to say.
You what? Oh, yeah, she wanted to sing a song.
Sing
Sammy.
a song?
Yes. Yeah, she's a very good
Well, I'm not,
singer.
but I wanted to.
It doesn't just ignite, it explodes. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton weren't just Hollywood royalty. They were the couple. Glamorous, magnetic, and constantly in the headlines, their love story was anything but ordinary. They met on the set of Cleopatra in 1962, both married to other people, and their chemistry was so undeniable, it became international news before the film even wrapped. What followed was one of the most talked about affairs in Hollywood history. They were married not once, but twice. Their relationship was intoxicating, dramatic, and completely unpredictable. They fought as passionately as they loved, often in public, often under the influence, and always under scrutiny. Friends and co-stars described their dynamic as volcanic. They'd shower each other with million-dollar jewels one moment, then hurl insults the next. Paparazzi followed their every move, tabloids couldn't get enough, and the public was torn between fascination and disbelief. Their first marriage lasted a decade, ending in a storm of arguments and exhaustion. But the pull between them was too strong. They remarried just 16 months later. The second time didn't last long. The magic had faded, and they knew it. Still, neither ever denied that theirs was a love like no other. In the end, Elizabeth called Richard the love of her life. And despite everything, the chaos, the headlines, the heartbreak, many still believe they were soulmates, just not the kind built for peace. Joan Crawford and Frank Tone. She wanted perfection. He gave her Hollywood and heartbreak.
This is my grandmother on my mother's side, Mrs. Todhunter. She's quite deaf, but she's the real thing.
Joan Crawford was a force, a woman who clawed her way from poverty to stardom with pure ambition and icy determination. Frank Tone, her co-star in the 1935 film Dangerous, was her equal in elegance, but not in drive. Their relationship began with on-screen chemistry and off-screen attraction, but quickly unraveled into a storm of jealousy, control, and silent resentments. Joan was obsessed with image, always camera-ready, always aware of her power. Frank, on the other hand, came from a wealthy background and preferred the theater to the flash of the Hollywood spotlight. Their marriage in 1935 seemed like a perfect match, but behind closed doors the cracks showed early. Joan reportedly tried to mold Frank into her ideal man, shaping his career, managing his choices, even interfering with his roles. He resented it, and she resented his lack of ambition. Worse, rumors swirled about his infidelities, and Joan was never known for keeping calm when she felt betrayed. Their home became a quiet war zone of cold silences and whispered accusations. By 1939, they divorced. Frank had moved on, but Joan never forgot or forgave. She later admitted she never really stopped loving him, though she couldn't live with him either. And in a twist straight from a movie script, Frank would go on to date one of Joan's fiercest rivals, Bette Davis. Some say that rivalry began on screen. Others say it started with Frank. Clark Gable and Carole Lombard. Hollywood's king met his match and almost lost himself in the process.
Corner and a wedding in the West. Clark Gable and Carole Lombard returned from Kingman, Arizona as Mr. and Mrs. Clark Gable. But even a girl like this thinks he's wonderful.
Clark Gable, the dashing king of Hollywood, had charm that could meld a camera lens. Carole Lombard, the queen of screwball comedy, was smart, bold, and far from the demure starlets of her time. When the two came together, it was electric, glamour wrapped in laughter, passion wrapped in wit. Their love story was a refreshing contrast to the scandals of the era. They laughed loudly, lived boldly, and genuinely seemed to enjoy each other's company. Off-screen, they bought a ranch, raised chickens, and tried to live a life that felt real in a town built on fantasy. But even fairy tales come with flaws. Clark was known for his affairs long before Carole, and whispers of lingering infidelities followed him throughout their relationship. Carole, fiercely independent, was no fool, and she had a temper. Their arguments were private, but insiders said they could be sharp and intense. Despite the tension, they remained deeply devoted. Carol reportedly kept a bell by her bedside she'd ring when she wanted Clark to come kiss her goodnight. Their banter was legendary, equal parts flirty and fiery. Then came tragedy, and with it, a grief that changed Clark forever. Though he continued to act, friends said something in him never fully recovered. The love they had was rare, imperfect, human, and unforgettable. Clark would later say he never truly fell in love again. And perhaps that's how you know it was real. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, their love defied rules, expectations, and even marriage itself.
Patrick Jameson, ma'am.
Are you single?
Oh, yes, ma'am, very much so.
Well, that's also unfortunate. I wanted a couple.
Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn are often remembered as one of Hollywood's most iconic duos, but what made their relationship unforgettable wasn't just what happened on screen. It was the secret, complicated, and often heartbreaking connection they shared behind it. When they met on the set of Woman of the Year in 1942, the chemistry was immediate. She was bold, outspoken, and fiercely independent. He was reserved, deeply private, and haunted by inner struggles. Opposites? Maybe. But something between them clicked, and it never let go. There was just one problem. Spencer was married. And he would remain married throughout their 26-year relationship. Though he lived separately from his wife, he never divorced her, citing religious reasons and personal guilt. Katharine, for all her strength, accepted the arrangement, living quietly in the background of his life, never demanding more than he could give. Their bond was deep but complicated. Spencer battled with alcoholism and depression, and Katharine often put her own needs aside to care for him. She never spoke publicly about their relationship during his lifetime. Not once. For decades, she lived in his shadow, not by force, but by choice. When Spencer passed, she didn't attend the funeral. She said it wouldn't be appropriate. It was a love story lived in silence, built on sacrifice, and remembered in whispers. In her later years, Hepburn finally spoke of him, quietly, fondly, and with a kind of sadness that never quite left her eyes. Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio, America's sweetheart, married America's hero.
The romance that thrills the world. The marriage of Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio attracts a record crowd to the San Francisco court where the ceremony is performed.
But behind the perfect picture, everything was falling apart. When Marilyn Monroe, the most famous woman in the world, married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio in 1954, it looked like a dream. Beauty and brawn, elegance and fame, Hollywood's ultimate power couple. But what the world saw was only the surface. Their love was real, but so were their differences. Joe was traditional, private, and protective. Marilyn was becoming an international icon, desired by millions and constantly under the spotlight. Joe wanted a quiet wife, a simple life. Marilyn wanted to shine, to be seen, to be taken seriously, not just as a beauty, but as an actress. That tension reached its peak during the filming of The 7-Year Itch. The now famous scene of Marilyn standing over a subway grate, dress billowing around her, may have thrilled fans, but it embarrassed Joe. He hated the attention, the cameras, the idea that she was being ogled by crowds of men. Shortly after, their marriage ended, just 9 months after it began. But their connection didn't. In the years that followed, Joe stayed close behind the scenes. He remained a steady, quiet presence in her life, long after the cameras moved on. He sent her flowers regularly, protected her memory fiercely, and never spoke ill of her to the press. Some say he was the one man who truly loved Marilyn, not for her fame, but in spite of it. And in a world that never stopped looking at her, maybe that's what she wanted most. Humphrey Bogart and Mayo Method. Before there was Bacall, there was chaos.
I suppose you didn't hear her say anything either.
Well, you see, I was kind of tired and I wasn't paying much attention.
Why don't you all stop stalling?
Before Humphrey Bogart became one half of Hollywood's most beloved love story with Lauren Bacall, he lived through a very different kind of relationship with actress Mayo Method. Their marriage was stormy, unpredictable, and the stuff of studio legend. They married in 1938, both well known in their circles, Bogart as a rising film star, Mayo as a tough, sharp-witted Broadway actress. But together, they were combustible. Friends called them the Battling Bogarts, and it wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning. Mayo was fiery, emotional, and fiercely possessive. Bogart, by contrast, was moody, cynical, and often drank to escape tension. Their arguments became infamous across Hollywood. Friends and neighbors recounted nights of shouting, slammed doors, and sudden disappearances. Even the studios had to step in at times to smooth things over. Still, they stayed together for 7 intense years. Some say it was out of loyalty, others say guilt. But whatever kept them bound, it wasn't peace. When Bogart met Lauren Bacall on the set of To Have and Have Not, the contrast was undeniable. Bacall was calm where Mayo was tempestuous, soft where Mayo was sharp. Bogart tried to stay loyal, but eventually, the inevitable happened. He filed for divorce and married Bacall the same year. Even after their split, Mayo's name lingered like an echo in Bogart's story. It was a chapter he rarely spoke of, but one that shaped the man he would become. Not every great romance begins with love. Some begin with lessons. Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner. When two stars burn this bright, they're bound to scorch everything around them, including each other.
London Airport, where Frankie and Ava were sweethearts. Yes, it's Frank Sinatra and his wife, Ava Gardner, making a call on Britain.
Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner were magnetic on their own, but together, they were a storm. Their relationship was filled with glamour, passion, and just enough chaos to keep the tabloids in business for years. When they first met in the late 1940s, Frank was at a low point in his career and still married. Ava, on the other hand, was Hollywood's ultimate femme fatale, gorgeous, independent, and already used to attention. Their connection was instant, and their affair made headlines before it had a chance to settle into anything stable. By the time they married in 1951, Frank's career was struggling and Ava was soaring. It created a tension that neither of them fully knew how to handle. She was fiercely free-spirited, while he was deeply emotional and often overwhelmed by insecurity. They adored each other, but that love quickly turned into something they couldn't always control. Their fights were legendary, loud, dramatic, and sometimes public. But so were their reconciliations. Frank once said Ava was the only woman he ever truly loved, and Ava, for all her bravado, admitted she never stopped caring for him. Still, the volatility between them wore them down. By 1957, their marriage ended, but their bond lingered. Long after they separated, Frank would call her, write to her, even mention her in interviews. And Ava kept a photo of Frank in her home until the end of her life. Theirs wasn't a peaceful love, but it was unforgettable. A story of two stars who couldn't quite make it work, but never stopped leaving a mark on each other. Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey. He was the world's most beloved comedian until his private life turned into a scandal no one could ignore. Charlie Chaplin may have made the world laugh, but behind the camera, his personal life was often far from lighthearted. His marriage to Lita Grey, his second and one of his most controversial, was filled with tension, secrecy, and a media storm that nearly ended his career. Lita was just a teenager when she met Chaplin, who was already one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood. She appeared in his films, and soon their working relationship turned personal. When Lita became pregnant, the pressure to marry was immediate. The studio was nervous, Chaplin was panicked, and the ceremony happened quickly, far from the cameras, far from headlines. But not for long. Their marriage began in silence, but ended in spectacle. Lita later described their relationship as cold and controlling. She felt isolated, confined in a lavish mansion with no real partnership. Charlie, always the perfectionist, reportedly buried himself in work, while Lita felt increasingly invisible. When she finally filed for divorce in 1927, the fallout was explosive. Details of their life together, written in court documents, became public. And those details about arguments, power struggles, and emotional distance captivated the press and tarnished Chaplin's image for years. Despite the storm, both went on to live full lives. But this chapter stuck with them, one born from pressure, imbalance, and two people who were never truly ready for what marriage would demand. It was a union shaped more by expectation than love, and it ended as dramatically as one of Chaplin's silent films, only this time, the whole world heard it. Bette Davis and Gary Merrill, they brought their fire from the screen into real life, and neither one knew how to put it out.
Visitors was film star Bette Davis, just arrived with her husband Gary Merrill. Betty hopes to do some sightseeing in Festival Britain.
Bette Davis was no stranger to intensity. On screen, she was magnetic, commanding every frame with fierce emotion and sharp wit. Off screen, she was just as powerful. So when she met Gary Merrill while filming All About Eve, the sparks didn't just fly, they erupted. Their chemistry was undeniable. Shortly after filming wrapped, they married in 1950. At first, it seemed like the perfect match. Two strong personalities, both actors, both passionate about their craft. But it wasn't long before that passion began to turn into something darker. They worked together on multiple films and adopted children as they tried to build a family. But their personal life was turbulent. Fights were frequent, emotions ran high, and both had strong tempers that clashed more often than they connected. Insiders described their home as a place where love and resentment coexisted uneasily, never fully balanced. Bette, known for her determination, was never one to stay silent. Gary, confident and opinionated, refused to be overshadowed. The result was a relationship that constantly teetered between fiery affection and cold standoff. After 10 years, the marriage ended. Davis later admitted that marrying Merrill was a mistake, and she rarely spoke of him in warm terms. Still, it was clear the experience shaped her, adding another layer to a life already filled with triumphs and trials. Some say their love burned too hot. Others say it was just never meant to last. Either way, the passion they shared, both creative and personal, left behind a story as dramatic as any Hollywood script. Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller. She wanted to be understood. He wanted a muse. Neither got what they were hoping for.
Very quiet, I hope.
Do you feel certain at this time that you will be able to get away to go to England?
I feel certain I'm going to try awfully hard.
When Marilyn Monroe married playwright Arthur Miller in 1956, it shocked both Hollywood and literary circles. She was the ultimate symbol of beauty and glamour. He was the thoughtful, quiet intellectual behind Death of a Salesman. To many, they seemed like an unlikely match, but to Marilyn, Arthur represented something she had always craved: respect. At first, it was a love story built on admiration. Marilyn admired Arthur's mind, his calm demeanor, and his ability to see past her image. Arthur admired her vulnerability, her charm, and her desire to grow. She even converted to Judaism for him. For a while, they were each other's safe place. But reality didn't match the fantasy for long. Arthur struggled with the spotlight that followed Marilyn everywhere. The constant press attention, the pressure of her fame, it clashed with his need for quiet. And Marilyn, despite her success, was fighting personal battles that made her feel more isolated than adored. During their time together, she tried to prove herself as more than a pinup. She worked harder than ever to be taken seriously as an actress, eventually starring in The Misfits, a script Arthur wrote for her. But even that turned into a disappointment. He reportedly rewrote parts of it in a way that made her feel exposed and humiliated. In private, she discovered a notebook where he had written that he was disappointed in her. That moment, many believe, shattered something between them. Their marriage ended in 1961, just 5 years after it began. It was quieter than her other relationships, but somehow more painful. Marilyn once called Arthur the only man she ever truly loved. And yet, love wasn't enough to bridge the distance between who she was and who he wanted her to be. Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne, Hollywood's platinum blonde, met a man who promised stability, but found something far more complicated.
Go on and tell him.
Shut up.
If you don't, you'll be sorry as long as you live.
Shut up, shut up, shut up.
Jean Harlow was one of the first true screen sirens, bold, magnetic, and impossibly glamorous. By the early 1930s, she was rising fast, becoming a symbol of allure and independence. Paul Byrne, a respected MGM executive, seemed like an unlikely match. Quiet, intellectual, and nearly 20 years her senior, he offered something different, a sense of grounding in an industry known for chaos. Their wedding in 1932 surprised many. Friends of Harlow wondered if she truly loved him, or if she was seeking protection, a steady presence in a whirlwind life. Still, they appeared happy at first. Paul was supportive of her career, and Jean, known for her charm and humor, seemed to genuinely appreciate his devotion. But behind the scenes, their relationship was complicated. Rumors began to swirl, whispers of miscommunication, emotional distance, and private struggles that were never fully explained. Paul was intensely private, and Jean, though adored by the public, was navigating a world that often demanded she be someone she wasn't. Just 2 months after their wedding, everything changed. Paul was found in circumstances that made headlines across the country, and while official reports tried to calm the storm, speculation never truly faded. Jean, just 21 at the time, was devastated but kept her silence, a silence she maintained for the rest of her short life. Their marriage remains one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries, not because of how it began, but because of how suddenly it ended. For Jean, it marked a turning point. Her career soared, but those close to her said she was never quite the same. In an industry built on illusion, this was one story even Hollywood couldn't spin clean. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini. She was Hollywood's golden girl until she followed her heart and set the world on fire. Ingrid Bergman was the epitome of elegance and grace. Beloved for roles in classics like Casablanca, she represented everything the Hollywood system admired: talent, beauty, and a spotless reputation. But in 1949, she made a decision that would shake that image to its core. While still married, Ingrid wrote a fan letter to Italian director Roberto Rossellini, praising his work and expressing interest in collaborating. He responded with an invitation, and what began as professional quickly became personal. Their creative partnership ignited a whirlwind romance that crossed oceans, languages, and most controversially, moral expectations. When news broke that Ingrid was expecting a child with Rossellini before either had divorced their spouses, the public backlash was immediate and harsh. She was denounced by critics, banned from several American theaters, and even criticized in government chambers. Hollywood, once her pedestal, suddenly shut its doors. But Ingrid didn't flinch. She moved to Italy, married Rossellini, and started a new life, one that was artistically rich but personally turbulent. Their marriage was passionate but strained. As collaborators, they created a series of neorealist films, challenging and experimental, but not always successful. Rossellini was demanding, and Ingrid found herself caught between creative loyalty and personal dissatisfaction. Their relationship began to mirror the complexity of the films they made, brilliant at times but exhausting. By 1957, their marriage came to an end. Ingrid returned to Hollywood and eventually rebuilt her career, winning another Oscar and restoring her place among cinema's greats. But her time with Rossellini remained a defining chapter, one of courage, controversy, and the price of following your heart, even when the world turns its back. Lana Turner and Johnny Stompanato. She was Hollywood royalty. He was the shadow she couldn't outrun.
Don't look so disappointed, honey. I'm still here.
Mr. Johnson, I've come down to tell you that you're on the wrong side of town.
Lana Turner was the ultimate movie star, stunning, sultry, and always center stage. From teenage discovery at a soda fountain to leading lady in some of the era's biggest films, she lived in the spotlight. But behind the fame, Lana's personal life was marked by instability, and one relationship, in particular, would haunt her legacy. In the late 1950s, she became involved with Johnny Stompanato, a man who wasn't from the studio system, but from a much darker world. He was charming and attentive at first, but didn't take long for the relationship to turn possessive and volatile. Friends and insiders grew concerned as Johnny became more controlling, jealous, and unpredictable. Despite the red flags, Lana remained entangled. Like many women of her time, she struggled with the contradiction between public image and private reality. She was expected to be strong, glamorous, untouchable, but her personal life told another story. Things reached a breaking point one night in 1958. What happened in Lana's home would become one of the most sensational stories in Hollywood history. Investigations followed, headlines exploded, and the entire nation was gripped by the drama. Lana was forced to testify, revealing personal details she had spent a career protecting. Through it all, the public was divided, some sympathetic, others skeptical. But one thing was clear: the relationship had taken a heavy toll, emotionally and publicly. It became a defining moment in her life, casting a long shadow over her stardom. Still, Lana carried on. She continued to act, reinventing herself time and again. But the story with Stompanato was never far behind, a reminder of how even the brightest stars can fall into darkness, and how hard it is to reclaim your light once the curtain lifts. Hollywood's golden age gave us legends, on the screen and behind the scenes. These couples, with all their passion, flaws, and unforgettable stories, remind us that fame doesn't protect anyone from heartbreak. Behind every dazzling photo was a complicated reality, and behind every love story a lesson. If you found these stories as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a dive into the untold truths of Hollywood history. There's so much more behind the curtain, and we're just getting started.